Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our audience, our candidates, our moderators, and those that work to put this forum together. My name is Sidiria Asbury Crestfield, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Coalition. The Greater Harlem Coalition is a grassroots alliance of 6,000 neighbors and more than 95 Harlem and East organizations, including Block associations, small businesses, faith-based organizations, and community groups. We have united to support the safety and well-being of all Harlem and East Harlem residents through public action, policy advocacy, and community initiatives. To reverse years of New York State and New York City oversaturating Greater Harlem with drug treatment centers, the Greater Harlem Coalition demands a substantial reduction of substance abuse programs throughout Greater Harlem, as we are burdened with a disproportionate number of clinics. We have 3 times our community's population and addiction rate, while other wealthier communities do not bear their fair share. This medical redlining of Harlem undermines health outcomes as vulnerable patients packed into small areas are easily preyed upon by the drug dealers who thrive on the oversaturation of programs in our community. The coalition advocates for changes in the regulation and funding structure to incentivize drug treatment centers to provide small-scale, quality services to their patients in all New York neighborhoods. We demand public ratings as to the efficacy of these programs and that they immediately work to minimize the detrimental impact of their patients on neighboring areas. Residents in Greater Harlem should have equal rights to enjoy a minimum standard of health and safety enjoyed by residents living in other districts in New York City. As a diverse community of friends, neighbors, business entrepreneurs, and believers, we are committed to the safety, health, and well-being of all residents, guests, and visitors to Harlem. Please visit our website at greaterharlem.nyc to join in our efforts. We're also on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, so look us up, and together we can make an impact and vote in the people that will work on our behalf. So tonight's theme is Harlem's Fair Share. You will have the opportunity to listen and join the discussion of what the DA's office can do to correct the inequities residents and businesses in Harlem have experienced compared to other districts in New York City. We will discuss inequities in terms of health outcome, public safety, education outcome, and the oversaturation of drug treatment facilities, adult homeless shelters, and mental health clinics in Harlem. Our moderators tonight are Michael Hardy, Executive Vice President and General Counsel to the National Action Network, and Emmy Award-winning reporter McGee Hickey. So thank you to everyone for attending. And now I will let our moderators take it over from here.
All right. Thank you, Sadira. And good evening, everyone. And good evening to all of the candidates. And thank you for joining the Greater Harlem Coalition's debate. Well, I shouldn't say debate, candidate forum this evening. Again, I'm Michael Hardy, and I and McGee Hickey will be moderating with you tonight. Let me give you the basic outline. We will, one, of course, as you've already heard, we will encourage those of you who are attending tonight to put questions into the chat room. We will have someone monitoring that, and we'll try to get as many of those to the candidates, since part of this is for you. And so we want to make sure that some of your questions do get answered. The candidates will have 1 minute to introduce themselves. We will do that in reverse alphabetical order, just so that they have an idea of how we're going to start out. McGee and I will alternate with the questions to the candidates. All questions will be posed to each candidate, and each candidate will be given 2 minutes to respond to each question. The focus, as you heard, will be on Harlem's fair share, and Sean will be making sure the candidates stick to the time, and will put up a hand and let us know the timing of the questions as we go through and the answers. We want to, again, at the end, the candidates will be given 1 minute to make a final pitch, and the rest will be the magic that the candidates create for you all tonight in telling us how they intend to go about the office of the New York County District Attorney. So again, welcome everyone, and I guess we're going to get started. So I will kick it off we're going in reverse alphabetical order by last name, I believe, in terms of starting out. So first up will be Tahani Abushi. Good evening.
Good evening. It's so great to be back with our Greater Harlem Coalition family, and thank you for having me. My name is Tahani Abushi. I'm a civil rights attorney, and I'm running for Manhattan District Attorney to transform it away from a place that destabilizes our communities to one that invests and restores them. For me, this position is not a stepping stone in my career. It's not just a job, it's my life. Because when I was 14, my father was sentenced to 22 years in prison. And overnight, my mother became a single parent of 10 kids. So I witnessed the damage and destruction that this system causes, and inspired me to become an attorney to fight for our rights and accountability and ensure that we are centering people in everything we do. My plan is to make this office transparent, accountable, and collaborative to the public, and ensuring that we are accomplishing these goals through a public health perspective. Thank you so much.
All right, Alvin Bragg will be up next.
Thank you so much. Good evening to my neighbors. I'm so proud to be here with you. I'm a proud, lifelong resident of Harlem, raised and mentored by many of you I see in the chat log here. And my experiences when I went to law school were shaped by growing up in Harlem, stopped 3 times at gunpoint by the NYPD, and also having a gun pointed at me 3 times by people who were not police officers. I got through those experiences because of the love, support, and nourishment of the great village of Harlem. I went off to law school and then became a civil rights lawyer and a criminal defense lawyer, a federal prosecutor, and then ultimately the Chief Deputy Attorney General of New York State. And along the way, for the past 20 plus years, fighting in the courtroom for both public safety and civil rights. It is these personal and professional experiences that we need to fundamentally reform the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I look forward to talking to you tonight, my neighbors, about my vision for the office.
All right, thank you. Next up, Liz Crotty.
Hi, thanks so much for having me tonight. My name's Liz Crotty. I witnessed my first crime when I was 6 years old when a grocery store was robbed on 18th Street and First Avenue. That was just the first of several crimes. I then went to the district attorney's office, and after going to law school, and I was a district attorney for 6 years. And then after that, I was a defense attorney for the past 13. I've been listening to people for the past 13 years. But in listening to people, I think we also have to recognize that public safety is the cornerstone of what is going on in New York today in 2021. It has been a very hard year. Coronavirus and the pandemic has ravaged New York, the economy. Restaurants have closed. They have lost 51,000 jobs. In 2019, we had 650 tourists come to New York. We need to get those people back. Good economies drive New York City. And if the economy is good, and if we have public safety, which is the cornerstone of bringing back that economy, we will have it. I have the right experience on both sides of the courtroom to bring that to New York. Thank you so much.
All right, next up, Diana Florence.
Hi, I'm Diana Florence. I'm running for DA to fight for the people that never thought they'd win. As leader of the first of its kind construction fraud task force, I created a community-based model of prosecution to target crimes of power, not crimes of poverty. I spent my career fighting against corporations that steal from their workers and kill them. People like Carlos Moncayo, who was 22 when he was buried alive on a multi-million construction site. I've gone after people that abuse their power to hurt their domestic partners and targeted big real estate that rip off tenants and harass them out of their homes. That's exactly what your DA is supposed to do. The current DA, though, has done the opposite, over-criminalizing people of color while giving a pass to people like Weinstein, Epstein, and Trump. Going after corruption really matters because it ensures not only real consequences for those who cheat, it replenishes our tax coffers with desperately needed funds to fix our failing schools, housing, and healthcare. I am so proud to have the support from 15 labor unions, hundreds of thousands of working New Yorkers. Thank you so much.
All right, Lucy Lang.
Good evening, Greater Harlem Coalition. As a Harlem neighbor for almost 20 years, a national criminal justice reform leader, and a former assistant district attorney, I know that the role of the district attorney encompasses far more than prosecution alone. It requires deep engagement with communities, prevention, and rehabilitation. The next DA has to take a holistic view of the system and everyone it touches. And that's why I created a first of its kind college and prison program that brings assistant DAs inside New York State prisons. I taught in a reentry facility for many years and had the heartbreaking experience of seeing person after person come home to New York City without adequate reentry supports. I think in particular of a student who was a self-identified addict who came home and died in the shelter system of an overdose. A comprehensive reentry strategy has to include ensuring that no neighborhood bears more than our fair share of the tragedies that can accompany substance misuse. I'm running to realize the full potential of what the Office of the District Attorney can be, to prioritize prevention and healing, to enhance racial and gender equity, and to recognize the dignity of every
Time.
All right, thank you. Next up, Eliza Orlin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eliza Orleans, and I'm the only public defender in this race. It's been a big few weeks for our campaign. We put out a robust policy on the decriminalization of sex work, and we're honored to receive the least harmful rating from 5 borough defenders. Most of the candidates you're hearing from tonight were prosecutors, all of whom have spent their careers perpetuating an unjust and inhumane system. We can't now trust them to fix it. To create systemic change, the next Manhattan District Attorney must have 2 things: an authentic commitment to making change and a sense of urgency when it comes to following through on that promise. As the only public defender in the race, I know that reforms are not only desperately, but also urgently needed. I will bring an awareness to that job that others do not have. These changes are long overdue, and we have no time to waste. People's futures and lives are at stake. We must vote true to our values. And I'm the only one with a clear understanding, informed by experience handling thousands of cases in criminal court, of the harmful policies and practices that I will undo as your next Manhattan DA.
All right, thank you. Dan Court.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to the Greater Harlem Coalition. My name is Dan Court. I'm a state legislator for 10 years and a practicing litigator for 21 years, 3 years of criminal defense work representing poor people in Manhattan Criminal Court. My favorite book about the criminal legal system has very little to do with being a lawyer. Jill Lovey, an LA Times reporter, wrote about the situation in South Central Los Angeles, where the mortality rate for Black men and Black boys was higher than Marines in Fallujah. And she wrote, "The law is a bully against that which is easy, a coward against that which is hard." Nothing sums up the last 11 years in the district attorney's office more than that phrase. And that's why I'm running, not to be another prosecutor, but to break down and completely rebuild this office. And I look forward over the course of this forum in explaining in detail exactly how I will accomplish that.
All right, thank you. And Tali Farhadi and Weinstein.
Good evening. Thank you, Michael. 40 years ago, my family and I arrived at JFK Airport with just a few suitcases. We wanted to live in safety and fairness so badly that we crossed an ocean, my father not speaking a word of English. And then we struggled for a decade in a legal system that often felt inexplicable and unpredictable to become American citizens until we got amnesty in the late 80s. These are the experiences that have shaped my life. I know that equal opportunity depend on fairness and safety, and that's why I fought for it across American legal institutions, from the Supreme Court to working for 3 Democratic attorneys general, from the working for Eric Holder at the Department of Justice, to federal prosecution, to enacting historic criminal justice reform in the Brooklyn DA's office. I thank you for your tireless advocacy around these same issues. You can and should bear and receive your fair share, and I support you and I pledge to stand with you. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to go to the questions, and this time we will do last name reverse. And so that means, Tally, you're up first. The question that I'm throwing out to all of you, which will give you an opportunity to enhance on your opening statement, is the New York County District Attorney's Office and Manhattan DA's office is probably among the 10 most preeminent prosecutorial offices in the nation. And so if you are elected to this position, one, what would be your top 3 priorities? And 2, why should you be the person in this office?
Thank you, Michael. If elected to this position, my priorities are, as I've described, fairness and safety. And let me put that into 3 things for you. First of all, gun violence. We know that gun violence has doubled across the city in the last year. Second of all, gender-based violence. We know that these crimes are underreported by 50% and have not gotten the seriousness that they deserve. And I pledge to change that. And finally, making sure that we do pull back from the cases that have not made anybody's lives better and have actually made them worse. You know, you describe this as one of the preeminent prosecutors' offices in the country, and it is. And part of why I'm the best candidate in this race to occupy that office is because I have worked in 2 of the others. I helped Eric Holder, supporting him in running the Department of Justice as one of his counsel at the beginning of the Obama administration. And I was general counsel on my last stop in my career for Eric Holder, Eric Gonzalez, the other Eric, over in the Brooklyn DA's office, where as part of his leadership team and his management team, I helped to run an office slightly bigger than the Manhattan DA's office and to bring to life the kind of transformation that we are hoping to see in Manhattan.
All right, thank you. Dan Court.
Yes, I think the question was the 3 specific reasons or policies, and let me list them. First is a complete revamping of the sex crimes unit within the office. I was the first candidate back in February of last year to put forth a 9-point plan on how I would completely revamp the sex crimes unit within the office. Secondly, something I've been out front of for multiple years in the community, specifically in East Harlem, is ending surveillance-based technology, stopping the use of the conspiracy law to round up hundreds of young boys and young men, overwhelmingly people of color, specifically in West Harlem, that have been prosecuted under these conspiracy laws. It's a central plank of my campaign not to use these conspiracy charges. And third, the thing I'm most synonymous with my 10 years in Albany, ending all sorts of punishment of poverty that provides no public safety benefit. I've taken the lead on bail reform, gravity knife reform, a whole host of issues in Albany. And the reason why I'm the right candidate to lead this office is no one in this race has my record of actually accomplishing decarceration, of taking these tough issues on, succeeding on them, and most importantly, defending these views before actual voters. So on that central question of who you can trust to execute on this vision, there's no guesswork with me. I've been doing it for the better part of 10 years.
All right, Eliza Orlins, and again, the question is, why you, and what would be your 3 top priorities?
So as I mentioned, I'm the only public defender in this race. I have spent my entire career going up against the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in court. I've represented thousands of clients charged with crimes and handled as many as 180 cases at the same time. And for every human being I've represented, I've had to manage countless moving parts, from interviewing witnesses and managing teams of investigators and social workers and experts and making strategic decisions about the cases, all without ever losing sight of the unique stories, circumstances, and human beings at the heart of each case. I'm the only public defender and the only one who has advocated my entire career for restorative justice, for rehabilitation, and working to break the cycle and change this cruel, unjust system. And I believe that is precisely the experience we need, because the next Manhattan District Attorney must be ready to bring about these huge changes. And the changes that I'm looking to bring are, dismantling the way in which these two systems of justice work. One for the people like the people that I've spent my career representing, and one for those who are wealthy, powerful, and well-connected. We have to make sure that we are holding accountable the people who are harming our communities, the people who are committing these big crimes, and not punishing people for crimes of poverty, for crimes of addiction, for crimes involving mental health issues, because that's not what's keeping us safe. When we cycle people back through the system, we destabilize their lives. We make it so they end up reoffending or getting rearrested. Even if the data shows that even if someone is held in for 3 months, 3 weeks, or even 3 days, that person becomes exponentially more likely to reoffend or get rearrested. So we have to stop trying to use incarceration as the solution to all of our problems. Thank you.
All right, Lucy Lang.
I am the best candidate to work hand in hand with you, neighbors, fellow New Yorkers, because I have worked to reform the very system we are all seeking to lead and to change, both from inside and from outside. And let me tell you a few of the policy priorities that I intend to implement immediately. 1, a plan for equal access so that there will be no more backroom deals that give even the appearance of impropriety. 2, a police accountability structure that is informed by my work alongside families who lost loved ones to police violence, including Valerie Bell, the mother of Sean Bell, Victoria Davis, the sister of Delron Small, and others. 3, a sex crimes unit that is totally revamped, that is informed by my work with the survivors of the heinous abuse by Harvey Weinstein. And 4, a commitment to using the levers of the district attorney's office to end mass incarceration and racial injustice. And for that, I have received the endorsement and support of progressive prosecutors from across the country who are doing precisely that work in their own communities, including Sarah Fair George, the 2nd district attorney nationally, to voluntarily end reliance on cash bail. And that's the district attorney I will be for and with all of you.
All right, thank you. Diana Florence.
I am the best candidate because I don't talk about work in the theoretical of what I will do. I can talk about it from the perspective of what I've done, not overseeing it, but doing this work. And my career has been about prosecuting crimes of power. That is my number one priority, making sure that women who are victims of domestic violence or trans people, sexual assault, human trafficking, gun violence, wage theft, housing fraud, and police accountability. These are crimes of power that destroy our communities, and this is what I will do. I also believe that we cannot do it alone, and I never did my work alone. My successes were because I left my office and I went out into the community. I created a community-based model of prosecution. It's not for me to say what we should do. We decide that together. And finally, it's about being accountable and transparent. So it's not about saying it, but it's about what you have done and showing that you've done it. And making sure that if you're not able to do it, that you partner with legislators and community members to make sure that the laws do not contain loopholes. Until we actually prioritize working with communities, we are not going to get anywhere. It will be the same old thing. I chose to be a Manhattan prosecutor 25 years ago because it was the preeminent office. It isn't now. It hasn't been under Cy Vance, but it can be again, and it starts and ends working side by side with the community.
All right. Thank you. Liz Crotty? I think you're muted still, Liz.
I'm the best candidate because I've done close to 4,000 cases in the past 21 years. 1,000 of them have been, close to 1,000 have been on the prosecutor side, and the remaining have been as a defense attorney. I have been listening for 21 years. I'm also running because I believe that the job of the district attorney is to enforce the laws of New York State and to bring public safety to each and every neighborhood here in Manhattan. I have the right experience and I have the right perspective. First of all, victims need to be listened to. That is first. That's why I think the domestic violence and sex crimes needs to be one bureau in which victims are prioritized and victims are listened to and victims are explained the system and what is happening, and we provide services to people who have been victims. And that's just not for domestic violence and sex crimes, it's for all victims. Second, we have to get a handle on gun violence and violent crimes. We need to be proactive about what we are doing about these cases. We need to investigate and we need to fully prosecute. That said, alternatives to incarceration for kids who are 17 to 22 do need a second chance if that is what the case merits, because we need to cut recidivism. But every case is different and the facts in each and every case matter. So I think these are the things that we really need to start talking about. Additionally, I feel like we have to make cases. White collar crime was the preeminence of this district attorney's office. We cannot have peace in the streets if we don't have it in the suites. We have to hold corporations and banks responsible for the trespasses they do to everyday New Yorkers. And that is what makes me the best candidate. And that is why I'd be the best district attorney.
All right, thank you. Alvin Bragg.
Thanks so much. So the top three areas, one, we have to shrink the system and move away from cases that don't deal with public safety. That's the first. The second, we have to focus on violent crime. That at the top of that list are gun offenses and sex crimes. And the third is we've got to address police accountability. I'm the best person for this job because I've lived this work. I've done this work. I've done the most complicated cases and I've lived in the most affected neighborhood my entire life. Let me break it down into three parts. The first is management. This is a job, as you said, of one of the largest offices in the country. I was the Chief Deputy Attorney General of New York State, overseeing a staff of 1,200, doing work just like this. That kind of management experience is needed to change the culture there, to focus on centering the trauma of sexual assault survivors and getting real police accountability. Second, we need someone with deep case-making experience. No one in this race has done the kind of cases I've had with the complexity, whether it's prosecuting landlords who harass tenants, prosecuting employers who cheat workers out of wages, prosecuting an FBI agent for fraud and lying, representing Gwen Carr and trying to get transparency for her in the death of her son 6+ years ago, gun cases, sex offense cases. I've done all of this work. But perhaps the most important reason is the personal lived experience. All of this work for me comes from a place of having lived it. I'm the only one here who's actually paid bail for a loved one. I'm the only one who's actually stared into the eyes of a loved one after his best friend was shot and killed in front of him. I'm the only one who's put his arm around a family member who was incarcerated in solitary confinement and was living with me as he re-entered. All of these experiences, the professional and the personal, are what we need to fundamentally reform and move forward the Manhattan DA's office.
All right, thank you. Tahani Abushi.
Thank you so much. Something that's very important that is missing from this conversation is transparency. Now, for me as a civil rights attorney for over a decade, I have fought the very powers that got us into this position, including prosecutorial misconduct. And so as someone that has taken on agencies like the NYPD, that has been in living rooms across the city, helping people fight for justice and against systems that are made to throw the black and brown families away. This is the kind of experience we need, somebody that has the experience with making structural and cultural changes. And I'm the only one from all of the candidates here that have gone up against these agencies and forced them to change their ways. So 3 important things that I'm going to focus on in my first days in office. One, as my son General, a formerly incarcerated rap artist and activist, says, nothing about us without us. I'm going to create a collaborative advisory board made up of members of the community-based organizations, those impacted by this office, victims, accused, and formerly incarcerated alike, to ensure that there's a checks and balance on this system, that the money that comes in is sent back to the communities for investment and support, and that we actually address the racial disparities and the misconduct. The second thing I'm going to do is create a police accountability and prosecutor accountability unit to identify officers that has destabilized our communities, that come into our neighborhoods like Washington Heights, Harlem, and Inwood to fill their quotas, and have been taking our young people and pre-criminalizing them before they even get a chance to get out of high school. And the third thing that I'm going to do is ensure we have a sentencing review unit that reviews all of the harsh sentencing that has happened well before Vance, but even in the Morgenthau days, and ensure that we work to shrink the footprint of this office and get it out of our way so we can actually get people help, victims and accused alike.
All right.
All right.
Thank you. All right. McGee.
Yes, I'm here, and it's my pleasure to be co-moderating with Michael Hardy. I love being part of this with the Greater Harlem Coalition. And my first question to all 8 of our candidates. During the pandemic, there's been a roughly 100% increase in shootings in New York City in 2020 compared to 2019. Now, some, like the police commissioner, Dermot Shea, have connected the spike to bail reform. How would you, as district attorney, bring down the number of shootings and make people in Harlem and across New York City feel safer? And our first person we will ask that to is the first name alphabetical reverse, and that would be Alvin Bragg. Alvin, take it away.
Sure. So I know gun violence firsthand. I've had a semi-automatic gun pointed to my head. And as I mentioned, I've consoled a loved one after his best friend was gunned down in front of him. When I was at the Attorney General's office, we designed, some very smart data people who I work with designed a portal where we looked at all the guns found at crime scenes and traced them back to the last sale from a federally licensed firearm dealer. We created a platform that law enforcement's underusing. We can see the flow of guns. If we follow the trail of guns back to those sales, we see going down the pipeline to North Carolina, Virginia, and some parts in the Western New York, guns that are flooding into Manhattan that are not made here, and people sitting far away from here profiting from our pain. So I would operationalize that database, which we already created, and would follow the trail and hold accountable those who are flooding our area with guns so that we can stop the pain before it starts. That is a critical feature. Secondly, I would say I've done these kind of cases. I've done an armed robbery case. I've done cases involving guns, so I know how to do them. And then lastly, on bail, I just say the commissioner's argument, the data does not bear it out. I've written an op-ed on this in terms of the bail, whether or not that affected the gun crimes. The data does not bear it out. I think we need to look at the conditions. We're living in the middle of a pandemic and the economic issues. And I believe that's what's driving this current uptick. But we need to address it, certainly.
All right, thank you, Alvin. Next up, Dan Court.
Thank you for the question. The commissioner is wrong, but he's demagoguing the issue. But it's not just the commissioner; it's his boss, the mayor, and both of them are being dishonest about the facts. There's no connection between the bail laws that I fought for in Albany and fought against the rollbacks to the bail laws in Albany, and anything that has to do with the increase in gun violence. Now, the increase in gun violence is a scourge on our communities. I understand it. I've met a 12-year-old at Lehman Towers on 108th Street who was shot in the summer 2 years ago. So I understand it from young people who have been the accidental victims of this shooting. But we're not going to get anywhere forward. We're not going to make any progress if we lie about legislation that I fought for or passed in Albany. It has no connection to gun violence. What we need to do is look at different initiatives, different anti-violence programs. Of course, we're going to prosecute various cases, but we also have to allow for diversion practices. And I've said so about the way in which Art Gonzalez in Brooklyn has looked at diversion programs. That's the appropriate model, and that's the one I'll follow as district attorney.
All right, thank you, Dan. Next up, Diana Florence.
When we talk about shootings, we realize that we cannot have a shooting without a gun. And what we need to be doing is targeting gun trafficking. I actually have done this on a complex level. I have targeted gun traffickers and gotten dozens of guns off the street. And the way we do that is we follow the collaborative model that I created under the Construction Fraud Task Force. But instead of just doing it within the state, we do it up and down the East Coast. So that means North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia. We know where the guns are coming from. And those prosecutors are very eager to work with us because it hurts them as well. So that's the first thing that we have to do. But we also have to acknowledge that if someone does a shooting, that incarceration is going to be part of the equation. Violence is wrong, and people who commit violence need to be held accountable. But these are not going to be life sentences, and we need to be thinking about what happens when they come out of jail. And we can't do that 6 months beforehand. We need to be thinking about what happens to the people that engage in violence before they come back to the community. And that means connecting them with jobs and jobs training and education programs. I've done that work because I am proudly endorsed by 15 labor unions, and their work with justice impacted New Yorkers has transformed people's lives, taking them from being involved in gangs and violence and becoming leaders in the unions and becoming violence interrupters. We need to be connecting that that crimes don't happen and they don't continue when people have good jobs and good housing.
All right, thank you, Diana. Next, Eliza Orlins.
Thanks for this important question. So a handful of years ago, I represented a young woman. She was a teenager. Her name was Jessica, and she was charged with gun possession. She had some personal things going on, and she hadn't been going to school. And despite our pleas for mercy, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office wanted only to see this young woman in jail. They refused to offer an alternative to incarceration. And so we finally turned to judges, and a judge decided to take a chance on Jessica and allow her to participate in an alternative to incarceration. And Jessica went to this program. She excelled. She became a mentor to other kids. She came in with her update letters, which said she was attending more hours than mandated. She was doing so well. And she successfully completed the program. She came in on the day of her, after her graduation with her certificate of completion. And, the judge told her how proud she was. And it was a beautiful moment. But 2 years later, I got a phone call from her girlfriend. And she said, Eliza, I know you're so busy. And I said, no, what is it? Anything? What's going on? And she said, well, we have an extra ticket and Jessica's actually graduating from high school and we'd love it if you could be there. And so I was lucky enough to go to graduation. The judge ended up coming. We both ended up speaking at Jessica's graduation. Jessica's now, years later, gainfully employed, engaged, and has a baby on the way. So that case taught me, along with so many others that I've had as a public defender for over a decade, that even an issue as serious as firearm possession need not only be addressed with punitive prison sentences. I have retained a gun safety expert on my campaign, and I am committed to using the Manhattan DA's budget and funding to pursue proven methods of reducing gun violence, deploying violence interrupters and working to end the iron pipeline of guns into New York City. And I would encourage you all to check out elizaorlins.com. We will, in the very near future, have our gun violence prevention plan up on the website. But really, I think that we need to stop doing what we've always been doing and certainly not blame bail reform for this. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, Eliza. Now, Liz Crotty.
Hi, I've been saying this at a couple different forums. I think in June, the NYPD got rid of anti-crime. Anti-crime is a unit within every precinct, which is specially tasked with getting guns off the street. Now, I understand that anti-crime has some constitutional issues, but I think that we have to observe constitutional rights and get anti-crime back out on the street. They were specifically tasked with getting guns off the street. They disbanded it in June, and the shootings have risen since. I think also too, if you read the New York Times, when the police were asked about this, it's due to underfunding with the police and also gang violence. I think we need to be proactively investigating these cases and proactively prosecuting these cases. But when we prosecute these cases, we need to get them right. We need to go through all the evidence and we need to look at everything. And in this day and age, there is so much evidence. There's digital, there's video, there's phones. We need to cross off all the things so we know we have it right. And then once we have it right, we need to hold people accountable. And holding people accountable and holding defendants accountable is how ultimately people change. I know this because I'm a defense attorney. And if you don't hold people accountable, they don't ever change. I think that's where alternatives to incarceration come in very handy, especially, as I said, for younger people. But listen, not everyone is eligible for that. We can't be afraid to say, listen, sometimes jail is the right answer. I think that also encourages deterrence. And deterrence can never be underrated. If people know they're going to be held responsible for their actions, they think twice before they do them.
Thank you, Liz. Our next up, Lucy Lang.
McGee, we can't give in, despite the crisis the city is in, to fear-mongering around the overdue reforms that have thankfully been enacted. We also can't whitewash the outrageous increase in violent crime at the pavement level by saying only that we're going to prosecute gun trafficking, because the reality is that shootings themselves are at a 14-year high in our city. I have responded to all of Manhattan's hospitals to bloody street scenes where people have been shot and sometimes killed. And I've also responded to scenes where someone has been shot in retaliation for the previous shooting. What we have done, the reliance on mandatory minimums, the excessively long sentences, has simply not worked. We've had a cyclical, violent problem with guns in New York City, even when it wasn't at these crazy levels. And that's why since day one of my campaign, I have had a comprehensive plan to address gun violence in the city, and it involves creating a specialized, tailored, trauma-informed gun court that will include wraparound services for survivors of gun violence and communities. It will include collaboration with community-based interventions that we know work better in the long term. It will include funding to local anti-violence initiatives, and it will incentivize the reliance on alternative responses with an eye towards creating sustainable, long-term solutions, while at the same time, we also will partner with other agencies to try to stem the tide of guns coming into the city. We have to do something about what is happening on our streets today, and we can.
Thank you, Lucy. Next up, Tahani Abushi.
So, one thing that the commissioner likes to do is place blame elsewhere. The uptick in violence and gun shootings is happening at a time when we have a overbloated NYPD budget, a large district attorney budget, and enough staff forces on the ground. Yet we still see these issues persisting. And it's because one thing that has been missing from this entire equation is the community. And so preventative measures are paramount here. We have the harsh sentencing laws. We have the convict at all costs prosecutors in place. What we don't have is respect for community organizations like Aisha Sekou's Street Corner Resources here in Harlem that has been on the front line of addressing and interrupting violence by ensuring that we are bringing our young people in and understanding that science tells us that our brains continue to develop through the age of 25. So we need to rely heavily on preventative measures, making sure we are investing in education, after-school programs, job training, housing stability, and ensuring that we're actually building a trusting relationship between the district attorney's office and our community leaders that are on the front line of these things. I've not only represented victims of police violence, but also victims that were also shot by officers, whether they were beaten with their gun or shot in their face. And I think the overall conversation around guns is lax when it comes to police officers as well. And so the totality of responding to gun violence and the overall uptick in violence is to understand that the pandemic has ripped off a scab to a wound that has not healed and has made just more glaring the instabilities that are existing in our communities. And if we shrink the footprint of this office and take that funding and instead dedicate it to these community-based organizations, we can work in tandem with reducing crime more than what it was before the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Tahani. Now our last panelist, Tali Fahadian Weinstein. What is your response?
McGee, thank you for the question, because as I told Michael, this is my first priority. And anyone who thinks that this should not be the first priority of the district attorney, I suggest they go sit quietly in the back of the support group that Jackie Rowe Adams convenes on Mondays for parents who have lost their children to gun violence, as she has, and are living with this pain that never ends. And I answer this question drawing on the breadth of my experience from federal to state prosecution. I've investigated and prosecuted gun violence, including murders, multi-year investigations, including murders for hires, a murder where the defendant turned around and threatened my life, to the Brooklyn DA's office, where we had the premier diversion program in the country for certain kinds of gun violence, to supporting local organizations, to defending countless convictions of gun violence. And this is a multifaceted problem, a complex problem. And so it needs a multifaceted response, as I've written about and laid out on my website. It can't just be supporting community programs, and it can't just be diversion, and it can't just be gun trafficking. It's all of those things and more. It's gun trafficking to stem the flow. It's getting guns out of the hands of domestic abusers, because we know that the presence of a gun in a DV scene makes everything worse. It's enforcing red flag laws, enforcing the laws against ghost guns that are not properly regulated, diversion where appropriate, a gun court, supporting community programs. And I would run all of this through a new gun violence coordinator in the district attorney's office, who would answer directly to me and make sure that every single day, this is the first thing that we are thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Tali. Michael?
All right. Well, let me jump to a local issue. And this has, as we think about the pandemic, there's been a lot of perhaps unintended consequences. And really one of them have been the kind of rampant open air illegal drug dealing now that's happening on the streets of Harlem, partially because of the saturation of addiction programs in our community. And for many that even ride the subways, you have many people that are shooting up right on the benches of the subway stations in Harlem. And as district attorney, and we understand that maybe everyone there is victims in some form or another, but you know, how do we address these issues, and particularly the quality of life issues for the Harlem resident? No, let me, Tali, you're going to be up first. We'll go by first name reverse.
This first and last thing is working out in a very interesting way for me, Michael. Look, I'm glad you asked this question. We have a big problem. Overdose deaths have nearly doubled in the last 5 years, and this problem it's visible as you've described it. I've seen it with my own eyes. You can sit in the second floor picture window at Chai Wally and just watch this happening in broad daylight. And look, I think we want to help people conquer their problems. We want the burdens of this to be distributed fairly. And we want the people who come in and prey on the most vulnerable, including the people who are collected because of the saturation of methadone clinics in Greater Harlem, vulnerable, to drug sale, to be held accountable. And I think that the district attorney has a role in all of these things. The district attorney can be an ally in city leadership to demand fair share and to say, look what happens to the safety profile of a neighborhood if you don't abide by that. Right? The district attorney in appropriate cases, as we did in Brooklyn, can divert people into the programs that they need. We had a program in Brooklyn called CLEAR that had diversion immediately upon arraignment. So at your first appearance in court, so that we can help people get over this part of their lives. And finally, the accountability. That's our job. In the cases where people are taking advantage of the vulnerable, we're not doing our job if we don't step in and say, that's not okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Tahani Abushi.
I live here in Harlem, and I see very much how 76% of those who use the methadone dispensaries here in Harlem don't come from Harlem. And although we make up 20% here in Manhattan of the city's population, that we bear over 40% of these methadone dispensaries. And so we do have to ensure that these treatment centers are available across the city equally and in response to the needs of those respective communities. When it comes time to drug cases, we can't conflate accountability with incarceration. A lot of over 80% of drug-related prosecutions are for possession, and these possessions are usually recreational amounts. And so what we have been doing is criminalizing these things just enough to give people a record, not enough to maybe sometimes put them in jail or prison, but then now send them back out to the world in a position where they're trapped into this abusive cycle to be legally discriminated against. It impacts their ability to secure housing, employment, financial aid for access to education. And so my belief is that this needs to be responded to from a public health perspective. And instead of having the DA's office become essentially a debt collector for our state and the court system, we should invest that money in the public health sector with community-based organizations that are going to provide long-term quality treatment that follows an individual through the process and gets them out of the cycle. And I think that's what's been missing, and that's what's needed to ensure that we not only stop what's happening now, but prevent it from occurring in the future.
All right, thank you. Lucy Lai?
I've lived across the street from an ARC facility for many, many years. And it has never been a problem. There's a single facility in a few block radius of my house here in Harlem, and people come and go, and it's part of the fabric of our neighborhood. But just a few blocks from me, their friends and neighbors and business owners have almost 12 clinics within a 4-block radius. And that concentration is terrible for people who live there, people who are running businesses there. And that doesn't mean that the folks who need these services should be deprived of the services. It simply means that we shouldn't be importing folks from Staten Island into Harlem simply because this is where the city has decided to put the clinics. I'm pleased to commend the Greater Harlem Coalition on the successes of ending Mount Sinai's plan to put yet another clinic on 124th Street in the new facility that's going up there. And I think it really does beg the question of what we're going to do about the desperation that has been wrought by the pandemic and all of the collateral consequences that it's had on substance misuse and on mental health throughout the city. I worked alongside a group of interfaith leaders to create a plan for substance misuse and mental health challenges in the system in collaboration with public health systems, the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, Department of Homeless Services, and others. So I would refer people to my website at votelucyline.com, but it includes developing an advisory board of behavioral health experts, developing proactive strategies, and creating early diversion opportunities so that cases that don't belong in the criminal justice system go into systems where there's real expertise to provide the kind of wraparound support that people need to be able to thrive. But it must not be concentrated only in individual neighborhoods.
All right, thank you. Eliza Orlins?
Yes, thanks for this question. I think, of course, as others have said, it's necessary to ensure that people have the access to drug treatment that they need. We must destigmatize, substance use disorder and addiction. However, we shouldn't be putting all of these sites in Harlem and East Harlem. We must make sure that they're dispersed around the city. I mean, right now, Harlem and East Harlem are carrying the load for treatment sites for this city, and we must ensure everyone has their fair share. And so as district attorney, my office will work to curb the trafficking of drugs into our city, but we'll also work to ensure that the people who are battling addiction are not criminalized, but instead have access to quality treatment. When more New Yorkers are dying every year from opioid overdoses than from murder, relying on broken, war on drugs rhetoric instead of using evidence-based approaches to drug use is playing politics with people's lives. The truth is, I've represented so many clients who've been battling substance use disorder, and I've seen the way in which they're treated, the way in which they're targeted, the way in which they're prosecuted, the way in which they're incarcerated and not given chances. I think we need to be making sure that we're investing in communities, that we're giving people the opportunity for the help and treatment that they need. But certainly it shouldn't all be concentrated in one place. And I completely understand your concern. And Michael, I appreciate such a thoughtful question. Thanks.
Thank you. Diane Florence.
There is no question that it is incredibly unfair for one neighborhood to bear a disproportionate share. We all have the responsibility to take care of one another. I live in Kips Bay. I live steps from Bellevue. And I understand that we all need to do our part. That's why I'm the only candidate who actually held a forum on this alongside the homeless hero, Shams DeBaron, a man of Lucerne, and where we talked about the approach, which at the Lucerne, it was about trying to get men out of the Upper West Side, frankly, a community that had very, very few homeless and addiction treatment centers. And it's not about dumping people. It's about being thoughtful and giving people the services they need while balancing what the community needs as well. And so, yes, we have a great bully pulpit at the DA's office and we can advocate. But, in the meantime, it's really also about doing the things we can do right now. For example, we know that 125th Street is the drop-off point and the pickup place for Ward's Island. It is the only the stop and start. We can actually revisit that. We can work with the MTA to say, you know what, it's not just going to be at 125 in Lex. Perhaps it's going to go cross town or maybe even downtown so that we don't have, an overwhelming population of people at certain hours of the day, which makes it makes it difficult for people to access public transport. It's also about thinking about lighting, right? Sometimes it's simply about making the lighting brighter, and that deters people from congregating and engaging in unlawful activity. We need to be thinking about what will make us all safer. And we don't do that in a vacuum. We do that within the community. It's not about arresting our way out of it. It is working together to find common sense solutions.
All right, thank you. Dan Quart.
Thank you, Michael. A critical question for Harlem and all of Manhattan. We can't prosecute our way out of this problem. And I will not use the valuable resources of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office to continue the war on drugs or the continuation of sentencing of those who are addicted to drugs. Two points that I think are important. One, we shouldn't oversell all these diversion programs for those addicted to drugs. The better result, rather than the footprint of the office and the top charge hovering over people, making them return to court to tell the judge how they're doing all the time, is really to get people out of the courtroom and liaison them with not-for-profit providers who provide these essential services through your tax dollars in the city budget. But I want to talk about fair share, because nobody has my experience actually have to making these decisions and tell constituents what they don't want to hear. I supported a women's shelter 100 feet from both my kids' elementary school. 3 months ago, supporting 250 beds at the Vanderbilt Y on 47th Street. This is not a theoretical problem for me. This is something I've had to do and defend my votes before angry constituents. And it's not just about advocacy. It's about an actual plan to work with the next city council, the Manhattan delegation, the next speaker, and whoever the next mayor is for an actual fair share plan in Manhattan. Advocacy is not enough. Experience as a legislator, experience with dealing with other elected officials, that's how we'll actually achieve a fair share plan in Manhattan.
All right, thanks. Alvin Bragg.
Yeah, so my father suffered from addiction, and I can recall when he was alive, one Thanksgiving day, going with my daughter to one of the types of facilities we're talking about where he was getting treatment. So we need these resources. We desperately need them, and I value them greatly. But let's be clear, I've been in Harlem for almost 50 years. I can remember when Riverbank State Park was built on top of a facility that created an uptick in our asthma rates here. I can recall being a high school youth leader at the Abyssinian Baptist Church, whitewashing billboard signs targeting our community for menthol cigarettes and liquor. So we've been targeted so many ways for so long. Yes, we need to address this fair share issue. In addition to fair share, we're going to talk about the adequacy of these programs as well. I've worked for decades on these types of issues, finding accountability, holding accountability throughout the industry, suing the makers of opioids for false advertising that led to the addiction, suing healthcare companies that did not provide the type of mental health treatment that they're required to under law. And yes, also prosecuting large-scale drug dealers. I prosecuted the owner of a $30 million business who laundered tens of millions of dollars of drug monies and did lots of violent acts as well. So we need that kind of all of the above approach. We need these facilities. I know this firsthand through my father, but we need them throughout Manhattan and not over concentrated like so many of these things are. It's not just this one issue. So many. I've done redlining cases. It pervades almost every walk of life that we are targeted. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say it's the diversification of Harlem that is now leading to this discussion. For the past 50 years, we've been here. I'm happy we're now having this conversation.
All right, thank you. And, I would say I wanted to give Liz the last opportunity here, so I purposely skipped over her, but I apologize. I accidentally skipped you, Liz, and so, but we didn't forget you.
Oh, thanks so much, Michael. First of all, I think this is a great part to segue to the people what bail reform is doing in the building right now. So right now, when you get arrested for misdemeanor drug possession, you get a desk appearance ticket. And you get that desk appearance ticket means you go to the precinct, you get printed, and then you get released from the precinct, and you get a date. Used to be 6 weeks, now it's 2-3 months before you have to come back to court. And now you don't even have to come back to court, it's all virtual. So I think that the real problem is, and sometimes most times I think in misdemeanor drug cases, they are diverting those cases directly and they are not ever being held accountable. As someone who has represented people who have had substance abuse problems and have had dear friends who've had substance abuse problems, you can't instruct people how to deal with their substance abuse problem. That's something that everyone has to come to individually on their own. But I do think you have to hold them accountable. And I think in holding them accountable, I say this to my clients sometimes, I am the fourth horseman of your apocalypse because I'm here to give you bad news because you need to be held responsible. And I suggest that you go see a clinician and deal with your problem. And they hire me to deal with their criminal problem. Now, I think, yes, programs have to be considered, and I think programs work sometimes, but what really works is accountability. And what really works is saying to someone, listen, you have to do better because we don't want you here. But also too, you can't be afraid to prosecute these cases. And whereas everyone wants to work with the community, I would work with the community in reverse to find out where these problems are and what the district attorney's office should really undertake to actually prosecute these cases, to keep businesses safe, to keep neighborhoods safe. And these are the cornerstone of public safety. So I think these are the things we should consider.
All right, thank you. McGee.
All right, thank you, Liz and Michael. My next question. The Office of the Special Narcotics Prosecutor in New York City is the only office of its kind in the nation responsible for prosecuting drug offenses across the 5 boroughs. Several candidates have proposed doing away with it altogether. Do you support this and why? And do you see it as a way to stop racially unfair prosecution in the war on drugs? We're going to go to last name alphabetical now. So Tahani Abushi.
Thank you for that important question, McGee. Absolutely. I support doing away with that office, and I would pull back my ADAs from that office as well. We have 5 district attorney offices throughout our city. We have the Attorney General's office. We have our federal prosecutors. And the war on drugs, the failed war on drugs, was just a way to get into Black and brown communities, destabilize them, and destroy them. And even now, talking about the legalization of marijuana, it doesn't consider investing resources into the communities impacted by this office and the damage that it's done. And so the reason why I support doing away with this office is because it's just another layer of prosecution, incarceration, and heavy policing of communities of color. And there are different programs in there that mimic the programs of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and other offices. And so the question is, why are we pumping millions of much needed dollars into another office that does the same thing and worse that many of other prosecutor offices operate throughout New York City? And so that's the reason why I would do away with it. And I think it's important here that those funds are used for community-based organizations on the hyper local level, not massive organizations that have big budgets, but again, very localized community-based organizations that know the families that live on the block, and that know how to address any instability that we see. And I think overall, the decriminalization of drugs is going to be the way to stop the abuses and the practices that we see going on in our neighborhoods. A lot of other jurisdictions across the country have started on this path, including Oregon, and there's been a great result so far. And so that's what I would do with the Special Narcotics Prosecutor's Office and the question of drugs wholesale.
All right, thank you, Tahani. So next is Alvin Bragg.
Even up with my alphabet. Look, I know firsthand the effects of the war on drugs. The first time I was stopped by the NYPD on gunpoint on 139th and 7th Avenue, I was falsely accused of being a drug dealer, stopped just because I was a Black kid in a, quote, high crime neighborhood. That happened all the time to my friends and me. So I've lived the racial disparities, and we are not anywhere near safer because of those kind of stops. I also led the Attorney General's work on stop and frisk, which focused on guns, but also showed the disparity in prosecutions after those stops, particularly with marijuana prosecutions. The Special Narcotics Prosecutor, the structure is flawed. It is undemocratic. I am running for district attorney to make the decisions for Manhattan in this space. The Special Narcotics Prosecutor has dotted line responsibilities to the 5 district attorneys, is not elected. It's a structurally flawed process. When I was the Chief Deputy Attorney General in New York, I confronted something like this. We have what's called the Organized Crime Task Force, which is jointly appointed by the governor and the Attorney General. And I saw the problems of that kind of joint reporting system. You don't have full control over the office. And I want full control because I have a specific vision. I've worked specifically in this space. Some things that people say they want to keep the office for, I've actually done. So I've prosecuted healthcare fraud, prosecuted the head of a pharmacy that engaged in healthcare fraud, which perpetuated, which is kind of the issues that we need to focus on. The high level folks who are bringing this pain into our communities. I've done those cases, and I want direct oversight of them. I don't want to cede that to some unelected office that has really brought a lot of pain into our communities.
All right, thank you, Alvin. Liz Crotty, we won't forget you this time. Liz.
So much. I mean, I'm not in favor of getting rid of the Special Narcotics Prosecutor. Just last month, they seized over 200 pounds of fentanyl. They do large scale investigations. They're borough-wide investigations where all 5 of the district attorneys sign on so that they are not limited to jurisdictional defects. So, and in doing that, they had an investigation which yielded 200 pounds of fentanyl, as I said. They do pill mills, doctors, they go after the big fish. And I think that is something that we need to look at because that's what keeps us safer. Also, if you're looking at this, you have to also consider the overdose rate was 26% higher. And I think that's due actually to fentanyl. Fentanyl is now in heroin, it is now in cocaine, and it is in pressed pills. We have to stay current as to what the problems that people are facing. And if we can get fentanyl largely off the street, we save a lot of other people. And that is public safety. And I think that that's what we really need to be concentrating on. I say all this too, the Special Narcotics Prosecutor does not do marijuana cases. And if they do, and marijuana I think that should be the goal of the governor and the legislature to legalize marijuana once and for all. But that's not the conversation of the Special Narcotics Prosecutor. They do large scale investigations. And I think too, when people have questions about the district attorney budget, the district attorney's office would then, they're not built to take 50 district attorneys back and then have to build out a whole unit that does all of this when the Special Narcotics Office is doing it quite well. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. Next up, Diana Florence.
The Special Narcotics Prosecutor was created in the early 70s under Governor Rockefeller, and the purpose was to attack drug trafficking whole scale. So what that means is recognizing that drug trafficking does not know borders. And as someone who has prosecuted major corruption and trafficking of guns and contraband, it is very important to have that county jurisdiction. And so that's what the special narcotics prosecutor should be doing. That jurisdiction is very important. But we also need to be clear about something. They have their own budget. So by them doing those drug cases, that frees the Manhattan district attorney up to do the very crimes that I've talked about that really are plaguing the city. Landlords that steal from tenants and harass them out of their home, gun trafficking, human trafficking. There are so many things that we can be doing if the special narcotics prosecutor is doing their job, which is going after doctors who run pill mills and large scale drug trafficking. That's the way that office needs to run. It needs to be consistent with what we understand in 2021 about a drug addiction. It needs to be consistent with its mission to really attack drug trafficking where it is. And that's why I support continuing it, but also making sure that it's consistent with our goals, criminal justice goals.
Thank you, Diana. Lucy Lang, it's your turn.
No community has a monopoly on substance misuse. It happens and is pervasive throughout all populations in the city and beyond. Unfortunately, some communities have been monopolized by its enforcement. The special narcotics prosecutor, like all 5 of the city's district attorney's offices, have been a part of that problem. I believe in a public health model for substance misuse. And I believe that all of the prosecutors' offices in the city should stop taking those cases. There are agencies better suited to handling people who use drugs. I think of the incredible example of Seattle Lead, of the examples of the HOPE program, where people are met by clinicians and peer navigators to help support them through recovery, which includes relapse, which the criminal justice system doesn't allow for. But when people call for dismantling the special narcotics prosecutor, what they neglect to say is that we may be the only city in the country that has one. We are also the only city in the country that has 5 district attorneys. And the reason that the special narcotics prosecutor exists is because the nature of narcotics trafficking is interjurisdictional and travels throughout the city. So imagine the bloat of city government if each one of the city's 5 district attorney's offices had to replicate the infrastructure to be able to conduct complex wiretapping investigations, complex undercover operations, and to rely on the other boroughs to do the same without some kind of consolidated effort. The special narcotics prosecutor does report to the 5 elected district attorneys, and that inter-trafficking jurisdiction is absolutely critical. As any prosecutor who has handled a narcotics trafficking case can tell you, as I have, trafficking devastates neighborhoods. And I have responded to the scenes where in the course of drug dealing, someone has been shot and killed in the playground of a housing complex. We must shrink the narcotics prosecutor.
Thank you, Lucy. Eliza Orlins, it is your turn.
Yes, so I'm running for Manhattan District Attorney because I think it's far past time to end the failed, unjust, racist war on drugs. I've represented thousands of clients. I can't even tell you how many of them were prosecuted for drug crimes. And I've seen the way in which the special narcotics prosecutor operates. And for people who tell you that it is simply because they're prosecuting major traffickers, it is simply because they're prosecuting doctors who are overprescribing pills, that is not true. As someone who's been in the trenches on the front lines representing human beings, I can tell you they are prosecuting people who are suffering from substance use disorder for handing over 1 pill of Xanax to an undercover police officer. Bridget Brennan has been an absolute obstacle to progress. She is unelected. She wields so much power, and I am 100% in favor of the abolition of the Special Narcotics Prosecutor's Office. Now, that is to say, I will not be able to unilaterally abolish it when I become Manhattan District Attorney, but I will be able to choose to no longer partake in it and not provide staff or resources to it. And so furthermore, it will be my policy not to prosecute low-level drug offenses. The special narcotics prosecutor is often involved in those prosecutions. And I think, anyone who's arrested for a drug offense should be given an opportunity to receive the treatment that they need and want, and without incarceration, and without giving them a criminal record and having charges filed against them that prevent them from going to college, getting a job, getting a mortgage, getting a school loan, etc. It will be the rule in my office, not the exception, that people arrested on drug offenses will receive alternatives to incarceration, mental health treatment, wraparound services, whatever it takes to make sure that they are seen as a human being worthy of humanity and not someone we should throw away for a 3-year sentence in upstate prison. Thank you.
Thank you, Eliza. Dan Court, your turn.
Glad I was able to get this question. I've been opposed I support legislatively the repeal of a relic of the 1970s on the war on drugs, and that would be repealing the statute that created the SNP. Consistent with that, I would come up with a transition plan to recall the 57 ADAs who are on loan to the SNP. To me, the issue is really, how do you reduce the footprint, not just of the office, but really the prosecution that's consistent with the war on drugs. And this is really how you do it, is reduce that footprint. And that includes declining to prosecute a whole host of crimes, which I've set forth on my website about in the DA race, as well as reducing charges on drug charges from felonies to misdemeanors. And that's also consistent with eliminating legislatively the SNP, and in the interim, because that's not going to happen likely anytime soon, although I'm supportive of it in Albany, a recalling of the 57 ADAs in a transition period.
Thank you, Dan. Last, Tali Fahadian Weinstein, what is your answer to the Special Narcotics Office question?
Thank you, McGee. I've said that I would look at it carefully when I got to the DA's office, because it's a hard question for the following reason. Obviously, it's much better if the Manhattan DA has complete responsibility for the safety of the people of Manhattan. On the other hand, as other people have said, we have 5 boroughs that are sitting very close together, and the patterns of narcotic trafficking don't respect that. And the way distribution, large-scale distribution, often works is, for example, for drugs to come into the Bronx and then be distributed in one, packaged in another borough and distributed in another. But I want to be crystal clear about this. If the Special Narcotics Office continues to exist, I will not support, I will not sign off on agreements, and I will not send ADAs to an office that is not consistent with my values and my priorities. And so that means I do support cases like the seizing of the fentanyl that Liz described. They actually seized more fentanyl in January than in all of last year. You know, a lethal substance that is killing people, doctors who run pill mills, and most important to me, drug trafficking that is connected to violence, as it was in some of the violent crime cases, including murder, that I myself investigated and prosecuted when I was a federal prosecutor. On the other hand, I will not support sending ADAs off to do and sign off on agreements for prosecutions that are racially disparate, that don't advance public safety, that punish people for their chemical dependencies, because that's unfair and ineffective, and that result in sentences for nonviolent crimes that are unfair and that are excessive, that are not consistent with our values, and that do nothing to advance public safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Tali. Michael?
All right. You know, I'm really tempted to go back to the anti-crime unit. And Liz, when you spoke about it, you highlighted some of the constitutional issues there. But I'm going to go to what would be an elephant in the rooms of the Manhattan District Attorney. And I'm going to do it as a yes or no, so we can get through it quick. But obviously, there's been a lot of news about the potential criminal violations committed by the former president of the United States, Donald Trump. A lot of that will fall into the District Attorney of Manhattan's office. So yes or no, if you are elected, will you aggressively pursue prosecutions against the former president and or the Trump organization? And Tali, you're up first.
Michael, I know that my colleagues are going to agree with me because we got this yes or no question another time. And, you know, we all said what we must, which is we can't promise to prosecute anybody. I can promise to stand up for the principle that we are all equal under the law, must be held to account for the harms that we cause to other New Yorkers, no matter what power we go on to acquire or who we may be. Sorry.
I was doing it as a yes or no, but you gave a little bit of an answer, so I guess we're going to have to let people answer. So, Dan?
Yes. Thank you, Michael. As Tali pointed out, and we've answered this before at forums, it would be a mistake for any of us to answer that question, yes or no. I can only say I'll follow the facts wherever they go. And obviously, we'll take into consideration any serious charge, and it would be incumbent upon any of us to follow up on a significant and serious case, but I can't answer that yes or no.
All right. Eliza?
Like my colleague said, it would be irresponsible for any of us to say yes or no to this, but I want to be crystal clear that I truly believe that, no one is above the law, and people will be and must be held accountable, especially those who are wealthy and well-connected and abuse their power.
All right. Lucy? You're on mute.
You would think I would have learned by now. Ditto my colleagues, and I have a robust equal justice equals equal access policy that outlines the importance of ending backroom meetings between well-heeled attorneys and the district attorney.
All right. Diane?
I spent my career prosecuting corruption and navigating around that concierge system of justice that currently exists and has prospered under Cy Vance. And so what we need to do, while I can't specifically comment on the Trump case, I can say that we need to end this deference to power once and for all and follow the facts wherever they lead. And that means looking at all crimes on the table, not just the headline ones and the sexy ones, but it could be things like tax crimes, money laundering. There is a variety of ways. I've done this work. I've done it on complicated matters against powerful people, and I will continue to go to prosecute people that violate the law, no matter who they are or how much money they have.
All right. Liz?
I was wondering if I was going to get skipped again, but this one I don't mind, because I'm going to join with my colleagues and not answer that question. I do have a background in doing complex international investigations. I investigated Saddam Hussein in the Oil for Food program. I've investigated various Saudi families in the Middle East due to the Anti-Terrorism Act in connection with 9/11 investigation. I'm prepared for all and any complex white collar case that might come the district attorney's way. Thanks.
All right. Alvin?
Michael, I led the Attorney General's successful litigation against Trump for his misconduct with the Trump Foundation. We also sued the Trump administration over 100 times for the citizenship question on the census, the travel ban, family separation at the borders. So I've litigated with him before. Also broadly have worked on public corruption matters, prosecuted 2 mayors and the former Senate Majority Leader. So throughout my career, I've gone where the facts have taken me, and this would be no different.
All right, thank you. Tahani?
Yeah, like Alvin, I too have taken on Trump already, especially in fighting and overturning the Muslim ban. And I would put no badge or bank account above the law. If we inherit these cases from Vance, this investigation, like everything else, we will respond appropriately and ensure that the community is part of the decision of what accountability looks like moving forward.
All right. McGee?
All right, thank you, Tani. So I want to get this question in, even though we're almost running out of time, but I just feel it's such an important question. What would you 8 candidates do to address the distrust in communities of color, the way people in these communities, in your community, feel about the police department? Does the move to defund the police hurt or help the relationship? What would you do as district attorney to improve the relationship between the police and the community? Oh, and my first, I'm going back to first name alphabetical. So we start with Alvin Bragg.
Look, I went to law school because of my mistrust, because of the early gunpoint stops I told you about. My first significant case as a lawyer was suing the state police for breaking up a peaceful religious and political protest of my clients who were members of the Onondaga Nation. I prosecuted an FBI agent for lying, and I'm currently representing Gwen Carr and others in a case against the city seeking police accountability. This is a key issue to me personally and professionally. I would have a separate unit dedicated just to police accountability that would focus not just on force, but the kind of lying case I did when I prosecuted that FBI agent. We would not hide behind grand jury secrecy like I did it when I was at the Attorney General's office investigating police-involved cases. We would put out full reports of our findings and our legal conclusions. And I would hire whole people to look at this. My first hire for that unit in the AG's office was someone who was an experienced prosecutor, but also had a master's in social work. So we've got to do all of this with the community in mind. So that's what I would do on police accountability. I also think we got to look at these cases that have absolutely nothing to do with public safety. You know, a person arrested for taking up 2 seats on the subway and then charged for using his face to prosecute the police, to assault the police officer's hand. How does that case come out of the DA's office? So we stop doing those cases and talk loudly about the past injustices. That is a big step moving forward, shrinking the size, but also holding law enforcement accountable when they break the law. Those are the 2 key pillars to moving forward and building trust. And I talk about this. I teach a Sunday school class at the Abyssinian Baptist Church. I coach a Harlem Little League case. And I also have 2 children myself, an 11-year and a 15-year-old. So I talk about these issues all the time with youth. We really, this is to me, the most pressing issue. If we do not have community trust, we cannot have true public safety. I know that as a community member and as someone who's done these cases in law enforcement.
Thank you, Alvin. Dan Court, your turn.
Thank you for the question. Police accountability is public safety. They are intertwined and they cannot be separated. And that's what's critical going forward to get the trust back, which has been lost in communities of color throughout Manhattan. But look at my record in the legislature in the last 10 years on dealing with these issues and fighting for that. I was one of the co-sponsors on eliminating the police secrecy laws known as 50A. But more to the point, working with then public advocate Tish James, we worked extensively to get the federal magistrate who was overseeing the NYPD to really address body cam footage and dashboard cam footage to make sure with then Police Commissioner O'Neill that it would be disclosed to the public. So if your tax dollars are going to pay for body cam footage, you ought to know what your officers are doing in your name. And secondly, you look at the biases in the courtroom themselves through the ECAB, Early Case Assessment Bureau, with greater vetting of information, and often looking at specifically at bias type problems, disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, with some additional charge put on. We know those are interactions between police officers and young men of color and communities of color throughout Manhattan. So we have to look at those arrests with a jaundiced eye to really see the bias and look if really actually criminal conduct occurred or more likely not. And that's how you put the mechanisms of the courtroom and the DA's office to ensure a just result.
Thank you, Dan. Diana Florence, we'd like to hear from you.
Thank you. You know, a few months ago, I was dropped a few blocks from my home after 11 o'clock at night on a dark side street. And as I started to walk towards my apartment, you know, I was a little nervous walking by myself late at night. And suddenly I saw a police car. And when I saw the police car, I immediately felt a sigh of relief that I would be safe. But in that very moment, I also realized that that is not the experience of many, many New Yorkers, particularly people of color. And that is wrong. And so what we need to do is acknowledge it. Look, there is systemic racism that has plagued the criminal justice system. And we need to name it first, and then we need to figure out how to get it back and basically take race out of our criminal justice system. And how we do that is we first by going out into the community and talking with people and hearing their experiences, getting the information. And then we actually take the information and we hold police who violate the law accountable. And yes, it's a police accountability unit. Everyone in this race has one. But the reality is it has to have teeth. And it can't be reactive. It has to mean going out, finding the cases, and making sure that we do the cases. And it means using 50A, which has been recently declassified, to look proactively for the patterns of bad policing. And we can see that when we do that and we start to actually attack police accountability where it is and make sure that if police officers lie or abuse their authority, just like any one of us, they will be held accountable. That is the way we are going to build back trust in law enforcement.
Thank you, Diana. Eliza Orlins.
Yes, thanks. So the overwhelming hostility that police officers and police leadership have shown to even the mildest of reforms and accountability measures means that the next district attorney is going to have to decide whether to prioritize reforms and accountability or the relationship. And the next DA must prioritize reforms. And that's because police misconduct is at an all-time high, not just with the physical violence we see in the streets, but also falsifying documents, false arrests, and perjury in the courthouse. I can't tell you how many times as a public defender I saw a police officer walk into the courthouse. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do, and lie under oath, whether it be before a grand jury, at a hearing in front of a judge, or in front of a trial jury. And I've spent my career going up against them and cross-examining them and protecting people from them. But I saw these types of misconduct with stunning regularity. And even when I brought it to the attention of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, they did nothing. And so, the chronic misconduct on the part of the police really erode our public trust and harm our communities. And the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has been complicit in the continuing misconduct perpetrated by the NYPD. Cy Vance has used his power to shield and protect police officers rather than holding them accountable. And as Manhattan District Attorney, I will not tolerate police misconduct. Upon assuming office, yes, I will establish a unit to prosecute police officers and misconduct. And it'll be staffed with former public defenders and people who have taken on the police throughout their career. True accountability for police misconduct makes all of us safer. And it's time to restore trust and integrity to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office.
Thank you, Eliza. Liz Crowdy, we will never forget you again.
I think that this is the balancing act, and this is going to be the challenge of the next district attorney. I think that when you have vulnerable communities, you have under-policing sometimes, and you have people who don't feel safe, and they're much more likely to become victims of crime. Then you do, in fact, have people who don't feel at all safer when they see the police. And I think that these are the challenges that we have going forward, and we have to face them. I think we have to have community bureaus where tenant organizers, tenant leaders, tenant presidents who really know what's going on day to day in the community have an open conversation with the district attorney's office to say, this is what's going on with the police in our neighborhood. This is going on with crime in our neighborhood. It has to be a two-way conversation. There is a police public corruption unit that prosecutes police right now in the district attorney's office. And I think that needs to be, strengthened to its effectiveness. But I also think there has to be, police need to be, I've written an op-ed on this. I think police need to be trained better. I think policing should be a 2-year training, not a six months. I think that they should get some sort of associate's degree at the end of training. I think with psychological testing. I also think the starting salary of police is $42,500, which is a hard salary to raise a family on. So I think that these are the things that really kind of go into what is the role of the police? What are they doing? And how can we make it better? The initial job of the police is to protect and serve, and they need to protect and serve all communities. I think to the extent that they don't, and we can prove it as we can prove any other case, we should prosecute them. And I think that that's how we get public safety. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. Lucy Lang, your turn.
I spoke in my introduction about my plan for police accountability built in collaboration with community members most impacted. But I heard your question, McGee, as being about something of a bigger macro question around racial justice and what the district attorney's office can do about it. That Breonna Taylor's murder and George Floyd's murder have ignited unprecedented attention to a long simmering and devastating problem. My plan for the district attorney's office to address racial injustice includes recognizing and repairing harms of the past, shrinking the system and enacting intentionally anti-racist policy, supporting communities and community-based organizations at the ground level, and creating an inclusive workplace culture that reflects the diversity of the rich city that we all call home. I also have a comprehensive plan for community engagement, building advisory councils of directly impacted community members, ending the prohibition on assistant district attorneys serving on community boards and community associations, a plan that includes faith-based engagement with leaders who understand the problems in people's homes and immediately outside them. I'll also integrate into a performance metric community work so that people are judged by, promoted by, and rewarded for the degree and depth of engagement they have in the community that we all serve. I will also insist that every assistant district attorney take the class I created inside New York State's prisons, that they spend week after week going inside prisons and learning alongside incarcerated New Yorkers, both to understand the issues experienced by people closest to the problem and to help move us closer to dismantling mass incarceration.
Thank you, Lucy. Tahani Abushi, your turn.
We absolutely do not need more police in our communities. We definitely don't need to increase their budget. As a civil rights attorney that has done excessive force cases for over a decade, not only have I gone up against NYPD officers like in our cities, but I've sued them and sat across the table from our police commissioners and rewrote their policies. I've deposed dozens of officers, and I understand why they do what they do. And it's because they can. They can target people of color in communities like Harlem, Washington Heights, Inwood, and the Lower East Side to fill their quotas, violate our rights, and then slap us with charges like disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and other nonsense to cover for their bad policing. And so I'll do as district attorney what I'm doing as a civil rights attorney and holding them accountable either through discipline, termination, or even criminally charging them when they shoot at our people or they hit us with their gun or they assault us and intimidate us when we file complaints, or when they straight up just violate our privacy by strip searches for no reason else other than they have the power and they have the badge and the gun to do that. And so I've proposed a robust police accountability unit that is going to do two things. One, put no badge above the law. But second, ensure that the public has a seat at the table as we decide what accountability looks like. We will also ensure that all of the information and data we gather from the moment that arrest paperwork comes into our office is documenting the history of these officers, where are the charges coming from, what are the allegations, and ensure that there's transparency and independence between what the NYPD does and what the DA's office does. And it's going to require a district attorney that is not going to buckle under that pressure and can remain independent. And I've been doing it as a civil rights attorney, working hand in hand with our communities. And that's how I will continue as District Attorney of Manhattan.
Thank you, Tahani. Tali Farhadian Weinstein,
Farhadian
your turn.
Weinstein, yes, thank you. Look, all of us here should feel ashamed to live in a borough where some people feel more safe when they see the police and some people feel less safe when they see the police. And we should all feel ashamed that some people feel comfortable coming forward and telling the police when something bad has happened to them, and some are afraid to report. And I'm going to offer 4 ways that we can move toward the kind of rebuilding of trust that you've talked about. You know, first of all, I think we have to be honest with people about the failures in the institutions in which we serve and in which we hope to lead. And so, for example, in the Brooklyn DA's office, I led a year-long effort with the Innocence Project and Wilmer Hale to produce a report about the first 25 wrongful convictions that we voluntarily stood up in court and asked to have exonerated. I supervised the conviction review unit. You could read this report online. It's called 426 Years for the Cumulative Years Lost. And it just lays out there all of the things that we as an institution got wrong, prosecutors, police, defense counsel, judges, that stole these years from people's lives. Second, everyone's talked about having a prosecution unit to hold police accountable. I built a unit like that in the Brooklyn DA's office. I supervised it. We investigated and prosecuted police officers, including for testifying, for making false statements under oath, those kind of crimes that really degrade trust in the system. Third, I have a podcast for my campaign called Hearing. You can hear it on Apple Podcasts. And I think we have to have a national way of knowing more about our police officers. And today's episode with Barry Scheck, the founder of the Innocence Project, lays out exactly how we can do that. And finally, we have to support the police because they are our partners in public safety in making sure that together we are working on the cases that matter and that are actually protecting people and making their lives better, not worse. Thank you.
Thank you, Tali.
All right, Mickey, I think, time goes by so fast, but there's so many people that have joined us. And so, Nia, we're going to put this on your shoulder. We've got a little bit of time, so you're going to have to give us one of the more interesting questions or one of the questions you really think should be asked from what some of the attendees have shared with you.
Sure, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the myriad questions. This one says, many say they will prosecute police. However, there's a conflict of interest based upon a professional relationship. How will candidates separate this conflict?
All right, so I think we're starting first name reverse. So I guess Tali is up first.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you for the question. It's an important question. And, I was the general counsel in the Brooklyn DA's office. And so part of my job was to think about how to structure the office so that we would not have these kinds of conflicts. And that's why the general counsel was in charge of the Law Enforcement Accountability Bureau, to have it separate from the rest of the office. That's also why I supervised the Conviction Review Unit, where we went back and we reinvestigated cases that the office had brought, because we understood that it just wouldn't make sense for the prosecutors who were involved in those cases themselves to be a part of the reinvestigation and the reckoning. And likewise, we made sure that police officers who were involved in the original convictions there had nothing to do whatsoever with these reinvestigations. So, I think we have models and we have pathways for how to do that. And we know from examples in other parts of the state that it just doesn't work to have your homicide prosecutors turn around and investigate and prosecute the very police officers that they work with every day, when that officer is the one that shoots and kills. I bring to that both my experience in the structure and also just sort of the basic ethics of how to separate these things. Thank you.
All right, Tahani.
Again, I think as the only person here that has really dug deep into the issues of the NYPD and have navigated the adversarial waters to not only hold them accountable, but also ensure that we're changing policies, it's a matter of, one, making sure we're electing somebody that doesn't have a history of working with officers that were problematic. And secondly, the Police Accountability Unit does definitely have to be independent from the rest of the office, but you have to have the community part of that process to ensure transparency and to be a checks and balance on how we are responding. And then the third thing is, look, the NYPD and its union talking heads have to be reminded that they serve the city of New York. We don't work for them. They work for the city. And like everyone else, there should be no special treatment, and no badge or bank account should be above the law. And so it's a matter of really having the guts to hold an officer accountable, especially considering the fact that they hold positions of not only public trust, but positions of power that literally can destroy our lives and do destroy our lives. And so we have to we have to take that task serious, ensure the community has a seat at that table, that we are operating independently from any other agency or any other cases where we are relying on police, but also whether or not we hold police accountable shouldn't be conditioned on what we need from police officers. everything that happens in my office will be transparent and will be made available to the public. So it's not just about needing things from the police, but centering justice, transparency, and accountability around people.
All right, maybe the union should be required to pay some of those settlements. Lucy Lang.
Michael, some of the strategies that I discussed in response to earlier questions go very much towards this question. Expanding community-based initiatives and decriminalizing acts of poverty are strategies to help decrease police contact with communities. And that is step one towards solving these issues. I was reminded in a recent conversation with my friend Valerie Castile, whose son Philando Castile was killed by police officers, that he had been stopped more than 50 times in his car before he was ultimately shot and killed. But for the massive number of stops, Philando might still be with us. So we need to dramatically reduce the amount of police conduct that can give rise to those sorts of situations. And that includes the district attorney's obligation to closely monitor high-risk situations like protests, situations that are likely to give rise to instances of police misconduct. It also means scrutinizing body-worn cameras for the kinds of cases that we know often accompany police misconduct, such as resisting arrest or obstructing governmental administration cases. A prosecutor I admire, Stephanie Morales in Virginia, who has herself prosecuted 2 police officers who killed unarmed young Black men in her community, says, I don't know why people say that it must be hard to prosecute a police officer. It should be as hard for me to prosecute any member of my community as it is to prosecute a police officer, because I should be as embedded in the community as anyone could argue I am in the police department. And I will build a district attorney's office that is as embedded in community, that brings community into policy making, that is transparent about every level of decision making in a way that will make it as hard to prosecute any member of the community as people believe it to be to prosecute members of the NYPD.
All right, thank you. Liz, you want to go now or later? Liz Crotty.
Listen, I mean, police accountability has to be taken on with the same fervor of defendant accountability. That said, the police accountability unit in the district attorney's office now is in a standalone building. It's staffed with prosecutors who don't do other cases. I think that needs to be maintained. I think we have to look at the facts of each and every case. I think we have to look and see what is going on. But I also think we have to have a way that the community can talk directly to the district attorney's office, frankly, about what is going on with police misconduct in neighborhoods. Because I think that that's really where we are going to get the best sources of information. So I think police accountability starts with good relationships within the community. And I think that once we have those, we can really go out into the police and say, here's what the problems are, and here's what's happening. Also, too, the district attorney's office used to meet with precinct captains on a regular basis. And you could then go through the data and say, okay, Officer X made 15 arrests, but we couldn't prosecute any of them because the evidence was bad, the search was bad. I think we need to reinstitute this where we review cases and what are the police doing on each and every case, because they make sure that they're holding up to their end of the bargain. And I think that's part of police accountability as well. So I think that this is a problem that we all have to deal with, but I think the problem is on all sides of the equation. I do think, the racial disparity is real, and we have to pay attention to that, but we also have to notice that I believe 45% of the NYPD is made up of people of color. So again, it doesn't have an easy 2-minute answer, but I think these are all the things that we need to highlight.
All right, thank you. Eliza Orland?
Yes, thank you. And I talked about, having an independent unit that's staffed separately by people who don't interact on a daily basis with the folks in the office. But I think it goes farther than that. And I think, I talked about some of the misconduct that I've seen from police officers throughout my career as a public defender. But I do think that, to talk more specifically about the way in which police officers testify or the way in which they write things up, they tailor the things that they say to overcome constitutional objections. So, for example, I had a client I represented who a police officer said that he observed my client engage in a hand-to-hand transaction, a drug sale. And my client was in a Suburban, one of the vehicles that was high off the ground. And the cop said he was standing on the street and that my client had left the door open. Someone got in the car, left the door open, so the lights were on. And from where he was standing, there would have been the dashboard. And he said, yeah, and instead of handing it, at any other level, that he handed it above the dashboard with the lights on in the car. And that's how he saw the hand-to-hand. Because he wanted an excuse to go in and search my client, who was a Black man in Harlem. And, this is exactly why we have to make sure that we have a district attorney who is going to hold the police accountable. And it turned out that this police officer had previously been found to have lied to a grand jury, and they had to go back and reverse this case against my client. But, even beyond that, there should be videotapes. The prosecutor should videotape every interview with law enforcement witnesses, and in particular, the interview with the arresting officer at the inception of a case, because I can tell you their testimony changes and changes and changes and changes up through the day of hearing, up through the day of trial, and that is not acceptable.
All right, thank you. Diana Florence?
You can always tell what a prosecutor's priorities are based on where they put their resources. And the reality is the Police Accountability Unit used to be in a separate building, but it was moved and combined with Public Integrity many years ago. And that accounted for an incredible drop-off in the amount of police accountability cases that were brought. So we need to recommit ourselves and to do a truly independent unit. Now, I've already talked about my plans, and you can certainly go to my website to learn more about my very robust plan for doing this independent. But I want to talk about that part of the question about conflicts of interest. And that is the absolute underlying problem in Cy Vance's office. I know because I worked there and I had to maneuver around it for years. And that's because certain crimes were deemed important and some were not. So that meant corruption. That meant deference to power. And we need to, for once and for all, say that we will end that. And under my administration, we will make sure that crimes of power are prioritized, and that includes police accountability. It does not matter that police officers are part of the criminal justice system. We need to call it out once and for all. If a police officer violates the law, just like anyone else, they will be investigated. They will not be overly targeted. The police are not our adversaries. They are not but they are also not our friends. And we need to do the job that we were elected to serve. We are public servants. We must serve the public by making sure that we absolutely prioritize accountability, whether it's with corporate executives, landlords that harass and kill tenants and steal from them, companies that steal and kill their employees. I've prosecuted these kinds of cases, complex cases against the powerful. And when we do that, not only are we going to bring justice back to the justice system, we are going to get the money back that we have been denied. Because when companies are emboldened to put fraud into their business model, they do not pay their taxes. And we are denied the ability to fund our schools and our housing and our healthcare systems. So at the end of the day, when we talk about accountability and conflicts of interest, we need to be very clear about who we are serving. And it is not the police, it is not the powerful, it are the electorate, it is the people of Manhattan. And that is what I will do every day, as I did for my entire career.
All right, Dan Quart.
Thank you, Michael. The conflict is pervasive and can't be resolved or remedied simply by creating a separate law firm within the district attorney's office. That's a fiction. It won't work. And let me be more blunt. It doesn't even matter which 8 of us win. That conflict still exists, despite all of our best intentions on police accountability. The conflict is that pervasive, and we just have to be honest about that. And that's why at the state level, I supported legislation that certainly would create that conflict, remove a case in which law enforcement interaction with the person led to that person's death. If that's the rationale that's justified for state law in a case that leads to someone's death, why shouldn't it apply in a grievous or serious injury? And that's why maybe I'm alone amongst the candidates that say I recognize that conflict. I don't think it's resolvable, no matter the best intentions of whichever of us win. I don't think you can actually create a law firm within the law firm that truly is separate. Ultimately, it comes down to the district attorney. So the way I would resolve it is in those serious injuries cases, grievous injury cases, I would ask for a special counsel, because I don't think the conflict can be removed despite my best intentions or whatever process I can put in place.
All right, thank you. Alvin Bragg.
Issue comes down to sort of independence and leadership. And I've done this. When I was prosecuting the FBI agent for lying, I was also doing other cases with the FBI and had hard, uncomfortable conversations. I said, why are you prosecuting our colleague? I said, well, do you lie? Do you obstruct justice? Do you intimidate Black and brown witnesses? He is the problem, not me. And we have to have those hard, uncomfortable conversations. So these are important cases that go to the very core of the administration of justice. So after I had that experience, I was at the Attorney General's office, and I was the inaugural head of the unit that Dan was just talking about. I was the special prosecutor, and we built a statewide unit that had narrow jurisdiction at that time. It's going to be expanded in April, but over deaths of unarmed persons. And we did some of the things that some of the other candidates were talking about. We set up an independent unit. We were transparent with the public. We did hiring that focused on people who wanted to do these kind of cases. That's what I would do in the district attorney's office. A separate unit that doesn't work with the NYPD, one that is transparent, one that focuses on hiring people who are affected by these issues, hiring people from communities that have experienced these things. It's so critical. And then we got to talk about where people are located. Right? The office is all the way down on 1 Hogan Street in the bottom of the island, right? That's where the courts are. What about the Harlem office on 125th Street? It's small, underutilized, nothing going on there. What about the office in Washington Heights, which I don't believe has anyone in it? I think it's been empty since the ribbon cutting. So when we talk about being in the community, we need to hire people who sort of a Sunday school teacher like myself, a Harlem Little League coach, just to use examples from my own experience. But then the DA's office needs to actually be here and be present.
This week, virtually, I'll be
not muted, but I don't want to talk over it, but I think that's what we need. We need the hiring, and we need the presence here in the community. And I've done this before.
All right, thank you. McGee, I know, time runs out on all of us. You want to lead us through the closing statements?
I think maybe we're not going to do closing statements. I think we've closed our statements, I believe, and unless Nia or Sidiria tells us differently, I think we've run out of time. This has been a fabulous forum. Do we have time for closing arguments?
Yes, they have 1 minute to do their final pitch.
Oh, okay. Very good. Okay. So this has been, I began to say it, but it's been so interesting for me. I have learned so much. You 8 candidates are fabulous. But now we each will give you 1 minute to sum up why you should be Manhattan District Attorney. And we will begin in alphabetical order. So back to you, Tahani Abushi.
First time I walked into a courtroom was to watch my parents' trial. The next time I walked in, I was an attorney. There was a moment during my parents' trial where the judge asked the prosecutor, "What are you going to do with all of these kids?" And without hesitating, she said, "They're not my problem," and kept it moving. And what I realized in that moment, that these offices, these traditional prosecutors, were in the business of throwing families away, not seeing us as human beings, mothers, fathers, siblings. And I take these lived experience and my inspiration for becoming an attorney and standing by our communities while also holding these systems accountable, not as a job, but as my purpose. And in my commitment to make this office accountable, transparent, and collaborative with you, everything we do here will be centered around the impacted community and ensuring transparency by ensuring that the community is the checks and balances on this system. And so I look forward to having more conversations with you all and hopefully receiving your support of the Greater Harlem Coalition and its membership for my position in Manhattan District Attorney. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tahani. Now, Alvin Bragg.
Thank you so much. We need a district attorney who has the management experience like I do, having overseen a staff of 1,200, and the complex case-making experience that will keep us safe. But most importantly, we need someone from our community who has lived experience. When I think about community reinvestment, I think about my mother, who was an educator, and my father, who ran homeless shelters. When I think about reentry, I think about my brother-in-law who lived with me for a year plus after his incarceration. When I think about police accountability, I think about the gunpoint stops I experienced and the stops that may be awaiting my 2 children. And when I think about violent crime, I think about having a knife to my neck, a homicide victim on my doorstep, and a semi-automatic weapon to my head. Those are the experiences we need to bring fundamental reform to the Manhattan DA's office so it will serve our community. I would ask that you would join with our neighbors, Congressmember Rangel, C. Virginia Fields, Hazel Dukes, Ashley and Dominique Sharpton, and so many others in our neighborhood who are supporting me. I would extraordinarily value your support. Thank you for a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Alvin. Liz Crotty, you're up.
Thanks. I have 21 years experience, all of which was been in 100 Center Street. I know how the cases rise and fall. I've been on both sides of the courtroom. I've been a prosecutor, prosecuting street crime, doing complex investigations. I've also been a defense attorney for 13 years, listening to people charged with crimes, listening to people wrongly accused of crimes. I have heard it all. I know what happens day to day in 100 Center Street. I am not coming from another agency. I am already there. I know what is working and I know what is not working. I am here to make it better, to make it fairer, to have equal rights and equal justice for everyone. I appreciate the time tonight, but I also want to make sure that everyone understands that public safety and having public safety for each and every neighborhood is the cornerstone of this campaign. And that is what I will deliver as someone who fundamentally understands how the system works and fundamentally understands how to make it fair for everyone. Thanks so much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Liz. Now we'd like to hear from Diana Florence and her closing thoughts.
Thank you. In choosing your next district attorney, it ultimately comes down to the work and who can get the job done. My vision comes directly from my work, standing up to power, not overseeing cases, but building them from the ground up. And I've never done it alone. I have done this hand in hand with the community. I never waited for cases to come to me. I stepped outside my office to bring the cases that really mattered. I stood up for NYCHA tenants, public school parents, union members, and domestic violence survivors, all people who never thought the DA's office could be a place of opportunity and not obstacle. 15 labor unions have endorsed me because they know that no one else in this race has my record of fighting for everyday New Yorkers, and including today, the Painters Union. As your DA, I will do this alongside the community I serve, not in spite of it, to ensure that every New Yorker feels safe at home, safe at work, and safe on the street. Thank you so much. I would be honored to have the support of the Harlem Coalition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana. Now, Lucy Lang, we'd like to hear from you.
2 years ago, a Harlem man who had fallen on hard times stood outside of an ATM machine on Broadway and waited while people went in and out, intending to rob someone. A beloved CUNY professor walked in, took money out of the machine, and when he exited, the man who was waiting stole the money, pushed the professor. The professor fell and hit his head and died. The man who stole the money was charged with felony murder and facing decades in prison. But the son of the professor expressed concern about the need for criminal justice reform and the state of affairs on Rikers Island. And the assistant district attorney handling the case, who had studied restorative justice practices in my class inside New York's prisons, wondered whether there might be a possibility here to do something different. So she brought in a restorative justice practitioner to work with the son and the daughter-in-law of the professor, and to work with the man who was charged with the murder over a period of months. And ultimately, they all decided that they were ready to meet. I had the incredible privilege to watch through a one-way mirror over a period of hours while they talked about the man who was killed. Imagine something new for our criminal justice system. Restorative justice isn't for everything, but we need to re-envision what we can do here in Manhattan.
Thank you, Lucy. Now, Eliza Orlins.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for so much of your time. As I mentioned, I'm the only public defender in this race, and I'm the only one with both the authentic commitment and the experience to transform the system. We all know that changes to our criminal legal system are so long overdue, and we have no time to waste. People's futures and lives are at stake. And in order to make that change, we need to elect a Manhattan District Attorney who's going to fight for communities of color, for low-income people, and for families across Manhattan. The difference between me and everyone else in this race is clear, and I hope I earn your support. You can check out more information about me and my policies at elizaorlins.com, and I'll drop my email in the chat, so please don't hesitate to reach out if you have additional questions we weren't able to get to. Thanks again.
Thank you, Eliza. Now, Dan Court.
Thank you, and thank you to the Greater Harlem Coalition for organizing this event tonight. There's an old saying in politics, don't tell me what you're going to do, show me what you've done. And to me, that's the distinction in the race between myself and the other good lawyers, my colleagues running. In 25 years since they kept records of legislation passed in Albany, there have been 2 bills that repealed any section of the penal law. I've written both of them. We've been asked this question at different forums over different times, that when times are difficult, when the PBA is coming after you, when regressive voices in the press take you on, will you stand up and for the reform that you talk about? With me, there's no question. I've been doing it for 10 years, not just my work in the courtroom, but achieving real results for real people in the legislature. I hope I've earned your support.
Thank you, Dan. And lastly, but not leastly, Tali Farhadian Weinstein.
Thank you. And my final words are really your words, Greater Harlem Coalition, because a couple months ago, when I came up to visit with you and to see what was happening around 124th Street, and because of the Wards Island bus, one of your members said something to me which has stayed with me. You know, she said, look, I don't want my son thrown up against the wall. And I also want to tell you what else I don't want to live with. And she described trying to sell her house in Harlem and having a buyer that she had arranged who was going to come and look at the property. And she waited and waited. The woman didn't show up, and she texted her and she said, why didn't you show up? And the potential buyer said, oh, I did show up. I looked around. I saw what's happening in your neighborhood and I left. And I thought to myself in that moment, you shouldn't have to choose. You shouldn't have to choose between safety and fairness, between fairness and safety. And my career as a prosecutor, as a manager, as a leader has always been built around this principle that we all deserve to have both. And I promise to you that if I become the next Manhattan District Attorney, I will never ask you to choose between your safety and your dignity and fairness. Thank you.
Thank you, Tali. It's been a wonderful evening. And I just want to remind people, everyone go out and vote in the June primary, because it's our job to pick. And you all 8 of you are fabulous. And we've really enjoyed this discussion. I have learned a lot, and you'll see it in my reporting. Michael, do you have some closing thoughts?
Well, I just want to thank all of the candidates. We know how much it takes of you to come out on the trail, particularly during this pandemic, and be in these kinds of forums. And we really thank you. Your dedication to this process deserves that, and we appreciate all of your service. And again, we also want to thank all of the attendees. I know many of you may have put some questions in the chat room. Obviously, in a 2-hour period and 8 candidates, you can't get to everything, but please go to the Greater Harlem website. I'm sure some of that is still there, and maybe the candidates can reach back and answer some of those questions. And you know, McGee and I, it's MH and MH. I mean, we can do a thing, McGee and Mike, or Mike and McGee, however it works. All right.
I
guess,
like it.
Sadira, we're going back to you. Okay.
Perhaps not, but it's been a pleasure.
It's been great. And again, thank all of you. God bless you, and be well on the campaign trail.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.